I'm going to just talk to you about this book, which has been launched today, 9 o'clock tonight. It kind of goes live. Just going to tell you a little bit about it. The whole idea was born at the end of the end of January through a coaching session, and my coach was kind of asking me what I wanted to focus on. And I was like, actually, I want to think about how we can have more influence at the highest level in organisations. So we went through, and at the end of it, the idea of a book was born. But the last thing I wanted to do was to actually write the whole book myself. So I just thought if I did that, I'd be semi-pregnant for about 4 years, and we'd never get it out. And what I really wanted to do was to get something out that would be a summer read. And I talked to Steve, who's at the front here, and said, how about we do a multi-authored book and we get it out by June? And he went, that sounds really stupid, let's do it. And then we talked to some publishers and we said, look, we want to have at least 20 contributors. How long do you reckon it would take to do that? And they said 18 months to 2 years. And we said, well, it was a bit daft because the ideas that people have put in, 18 months ago, they'll have moved on from them. So we want to do it in 4 to 5 months. And they just laughed at us. And so we said, well, we'll do it ourselves. And so we went out to a whole bunch of people and said, we're not going to tell you what to write about. You can't publish anything that you've already published. We just want you to talk about things that you think are relevant to the future of business. And so we thought we'd get 20-odd responses. In the end, we got 62, we had over 70 replies. We got 62 authors in the book, 60 chapters, exploring a whole range of topics. From big visions of the future to how economics and government will change, how society might change, the kind of technologies that will affect society from the internet through to uploading your brain, through to sort of disruptive technologies that can impact business, how business would change, some industries of the future, and then some views about how organisations actually look at the future. Tonight you're going to hear from three of us, Dean Bubley, Yates Buckley, and myself, but you've also got a number of other speakers in the room, so I'm just going to ask them to stand up so you know who they are. We've got David Wood, who's written about the future of governance, so if you want to talk to him about that. We've got David Wortley, who's written about wearable technology in healthcare. We have Rishi Haldania. Rishi, do you want to stand up wherever you are? Oh, he's here. He's written about the future of spirituality in business. And we've got Anish Mohammed. Anish has written about the singularity. Anish has two records, actually. One is that he's written the longest sentence in the book. It ran for about 2.5 pages. And also, Anish has the other record for never opening a single email we sent him. So thanks, Anish. There are a few other people I wanted to thank as well. Sorry, my hands are shaking. We've got Steve Wells and Alberto Rizzoli, who are both contributors to the book, but have also worked incredibly hard on the book. If you guys could just stand up, doing absolutely everything for nothing. They're on a profit share. And we've got April Corey, who isn't here because she's in Houston and we just forgot to invite her. And we're too mean to pay for her ticket. And then that guy there, that's not the Publand nor Dale Murray. That's actually Ben Mottram, who's nowhere near as funny but much brighter. And then the guy just above him wins the award. Andrew wins the award for most likely to be arrested in public for his public profile. So these guys have done an incredible job. We gave them 4 months. Actually, we gave them about 8 weeks to write their chapter, do the second edit, and then just get on with it. And I'm just going to share with you some of the ideas out of the book tonight. And the book is actually being published. The ebook is published at 9 o'clock tonight, so people can get hold of it. And we're going to give you a free copy if you want one. The way you get a free copy is you pay for it with a tweet. So if you mention us on either Facebook or Twitter, you mention the future of business and use the hashtag FutureBiz. Now's the time to get your cameras out. Then follow us at FutureBiz. That's very important because we then can send you a code to download a copy. And it would be really nice if you could tell your friends that they can get a 30% discount on the book if they go to this website and enter this code here. And we'll put this up again at the end of the evening. But yeah, if you download, if you tweet about the book, then we'll give you a free copy because we're really nice like that. And we have a very distant relationship with money. Okay, so where do we start? One of the big ideas that we think is really driving the future of business is this. Sorry, did I miss any of the authors? Is there anyone here who I didn't mention? If so, sorry. Some of them we never met. They just kind of dealt with us by email, except of course Anish, who didn't do that either. We're still waiting for his second draft. But we're at this point where we're seeing this collision between two planets. On the one hand, we have the people who are born physical, organizations who make cars, who build houses, who run hospitals. For them, they see the world as a very physical thing. Improvement happens in a very linear way. We go step by step in what we do. If we have ambitions to improve things, it's a 5 or 10% improvement typically. They're now clashing with this world of people who are born digital. Organizations who don't see cars, houses, and people, all they see is data. And what they believe is that any problem can now be solved by finding the right algorithm and applying the right combination of science and technology. And so you have a complete clash of cultures between those mindsets. And the born digital people are also growing up with Moore's law that says the computing power increases by doubles every 18 to 24 months. So they're now saying, well, that kind of exponential growth can be taken into every walk of life. And they're challenging the born physical world. And it's really creating a sort of fundamental tension between the two. And it's driving this question about, well, how do we evolve our DNA then? Can we get to the future by playing within the existing rule set, doing what our competitors do? We know what they're going to do, we know why they do it, and they know what we're going to do. And so we kind of all play within a very narrow set of assumptions. But then along come players who say, actually, in order to succeed in your world, I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is change the game itself. If you look in the telecoms industry, what we saw is that pretty much every major telecoms player told you that they had the idea for free telephony before Skype. But they also said that it wasn't a very good idea to give away your core product for free. And so they sent the person back to the lab and said, please never mention this again. And then along came Skype and basically turned the industry on its head by giving the industry's core product away for free. Skype now has 40% of the entire world's global telecommunications traffic with less than 1,600 staff. You think about the number of staff that someone like a BT has. And you're seeing that in industry after industry now where the game itself is being redefined, not by players within, but from players from outside. And so the choice for most players in an industry is either to say, well, can we get there by playing within the rules? Or do we have to start to think about how we change the game itself? And what we're seeing through our research, and what was borne out really very clearly across the chapters of the book, is this idea that the organisations that do the best job at preparing for the future actually think about 3 different horizons. Firstly, they're very clear on what are we trying to bring into land, what are we trying to make happen in the next 12 months. Secondly, they're looking out 1 to 3 years and saying where's growth and innovation going to come from, and they're scanning the horizon to say, well, what might impact that, what might help us deliver on that strategy, or what might get in the way of this. Loads of people are taking pictures of the slides, that's fine, but we will also send out a PDF afterwards, so if you want them, you don't have to click away. And then finally, there's a group who actually want to look even further, who are saying, we need to understand what's coming over the long-term horizon, we need that early warning system looking out 4 to 10 years, so that we can make sure the decisions we make today are future-proof, that we understand where we're going before we make those decisions. And we're entering a world now where we're starting to really see the boundaries blur between the digital and the physical. Nick Bostrom, the Oxford philosopher and kind of expert on artificial intelligence, says we might actually be already living in the Matrix. We might be the digital simulation created by another planet. We just don't realise it. Which is a kind of funky thing to think about, isn't it? That actually you might just be pure data. You just think you're real. But what we do know is that we're becoming a very digitized species. We're already connected to a global brain. Before we even think about artificial intelligence, what we know is we're connected quite globally. 3 billion of us now sharing our data on the internet. It's become very much a backbone for business. What we also know is there are a whole bunch of emerging technologies coming through. I'm not going to list all of these, but from conscious technology through to healthcare innovation, through new food sciences, to hyperconnectivity, 3D and 4D printing, a range of industries that are kind of driving a massive explosion of possibility in the marketplace. All of this is driving a bunch of design tensions for business. Businesses, as they think about the next 5 to 10 years, are increasingly saying to us, we've got a bunch of fundamental questions that we have to get our heads around. The first is, on the one hand, we're saying we want to be a fairer, more equal society and we want to distribute wealth to everyone. But on the other hand, more and more of us are in markets where winner takes almost all. If you look in search, the number 2 in search after Google has very little. The number 2 in online retail after Amazon has a much smaller share. And in every one of these markets, the second player really doesn't succeed. And so there's this kind of consolidation of wealth and power. And there's this tension now for businesses to say which side of that line do we want to play on. There's also this kind of growing understanding that actually a lot of the dialogue around business today is very masculine. It's about growth targets, it's about automation, it's very much playing to the masculine. And the question arises, my thanks to Mariella for reminding me that we hadn't mentioned this enough. The feminine is becoming more important as well. People are beginning to understand that spirituality, connection, human attachment are just as important as the technical features of an organization. And the challenge for organizations is as we automate, as we put more and more measures around ourselves, how do we make sure we maintain that within our organizations? We also see that the kind of whole economic structure is being challenged. We look at in financial services, and we've got this challenge now for the old money, the people who thought they ruled the world, thought they owned the world, thought they could control the pace of decisions, now being challenged by more and more new players coming in who are completely bypassing financial services players that exist today, setting up these crowd-based platforms. So whether you're raising equity, debt, whether you're pre-selling your product through a sales platform like Kickstarter, or you're raising commercial finance, whatever, the entire industry value chain in financial services can potentially be replaced by these new players who are bypassing the old structures. A lot of businesses are saying, well, which do we work with? Who do we go with now? Do we go with the old money, or do we take a bet on working with these new players? Clearly, you're going to hear a lot tonight about technology and how we're moving to a more and more advanced level of technology that can replace humans. Oxford did a study recently where they said that up to 47% of all the jobs that exist today could just be automated out of existence within the next 20 years. So there's a question for organizations that says, well, where do we sit on that balance? Do we see ourselves as having a responsibility for creating jobs? Because if we don't create jobs, then where is the money going to come from people to buy our goods and services if we're running our business, entirely automated? And I'm going to touch on this a bit more later, but we are seeing a whole range of enhancements, and a number of chapters in the book explore the idea of body shops where you'll be able to go in and get genetic modification. There's a technique called CRISPR-Cas9 now that allows you to edit genes so that we could potentially change the colour of our skin, the colour of our eyes, the thickness of our hair. It's been proven to work now. We're also seeing with 3D printing, you could have a range of different legs, so you could be a different height every single day. There are already people doing it. We're moving into a world where we could see chemical, genetic, physical and electronic enhancement. For organisations, there's this question about, well, how do we deal with that, both within the organisation where we've got enhanced and unenhanced people, but also when do we start to get into those markets, and do we encourage our staff to use drugs that could enhance their cognition? Do we encourage them to take these treatments? And then finally, there's this kind of big trade-off between the kind of Star Wars versus Star Trek model. The Star Wars model, as we know, was all about control, about power, about amassing wealth, about fighting everyone off, the winner took all. Star Trek, the interesting thing was that the goal was to spread peace, to spread harmony and abundance, and there's no money in Star Trek. And more we're seeing there are industries we're moving to where the price of goods is falling to almost zero. And there's some people saying we're moving towards a Star Trek economy. And we're seeing more and more businesses challenged now, and it comes up across the book, of that challenge of which model do we go for in terms of, are we a kind of wealth accumulator or are we a wealth distributor in our model? All of this is kind of underpinned by a fundamental kind of transformation coming about through the role of technology. We know about it being used to leverage talent, re-engineer processes, drive innovation. The big new conversation is all about how things like collaborative technology and artificial intelligence will actually allow us to pool the knowledge in the organization and create a hive mind, collaborative decision making where the people themselves might not necessarily be present. And what we see is, a whole range of technologies coming to market. This is a set of 200 we looked at. But if you look now, you can at least plot about 60% of what's coming over the next 10 to 20 years. So if we understand the waves of development, then we can start to make smarter choices for our organization. And we know there's a natural evolution going on. We started life with desktops. We then moved to luggables, to portables, to mobiles, to the smartphone. The smartphone has transformed our world since 2006 when it appeared on the market. So the question is, well, what changes in the next 9 years? Well, one of the things we know is we're moving into the era of wearable technologies, whether it's health monitoring, computing, all sorts of devices that will wear on or close to the body. If this stuff was being patented 3 to 5 years ago, then the question is, well, what comes next? And what's been patented in the last 3 years is a range of embedded technologies. There are already millions of people who have pacemakers, cochlear implants, ocular implants, to enhance various bodily functions. That's already happening. The next wave is going to see memory for your mobile phones, GPS trackers, things to enhance your senses, a whole range of enhancements that will basically drive a huge change in the workforce over the next 5 to 10 years. And we know all of that is going to be connected to a very immersive internet, where, for example, we'll have multi-sensory experiences. Last year, you could buy something called the O-Phone on Kickstarter, where you could transmit up to 356 different smells to someone else with an O-Phone. There are also people working on touch and taste stimulation electronically. So within a few years, we'll be in a situation where you'll be able to book a hotel by smelling the bath products, tasting the food in the restaurant, and feeling the bed linens, all via your devices. Which means a fundamental shift to the way a lot of retail sectors work. And we know this is all going to be connected to the Internet of Everything. Estimates vary, but somewhere between 50 and 250 billion devices will be connected to the Internet over the next 10 to 15 years, from your mobile phone right the way through to your fridge and your car. And those in turn will be connected to something like 1 billion sensors. So we'll be drowning in data. And a real challenge for our organizations is how we manage that and turn it into useful knowledge. And then we move into the kind of era of artificial intelligence, and we're seeing a continuous rate of improvement in what's called weak AI. So if you use a mobile phone, if you use language translation, if you fly a plane, if you book a financial services product, all of those things use forms of AI, and we're seeing increasingly sophisticated technologies being developed where we're getting closer to the levels of human cognition. We're not there yet, but potentially in the next 10 to 15 years we could get very close. And that's why so many people are worried about the potential for it to eliminate jobs. And some people are talking about the point where we get to super intelligence, where we have systems that are actually smarter than humans, and then we might see them inventing new science and also questioning why they still have humans around, because they're so much smarter than us. And and that's where they talk about the potential existential risks. And we know that robots are becoming a very fundamental aspect of our lives. There's a couple of reports recently about this factory in China, which was moving to 100% robots. And then they backtracked a little bit and said, well, it'll be 90% plus. But the region they're in, Guangdong, the province has actually got an investment program where they're putting $152 billion in to basically replace all of the humans in pretty much all the factories over the next 3 years. So we know the pace of innovation here is phenomenal and creates big questions. And there is this issue then about where do we want to go? Do we see technology as something that automates us out of our roles, or is it something that gives us smart augmentation? So if I'm a doctor today in India, I can now perform remote surgery in villages that I would never visit using technology. So that's augmenting my role. The question is, would it ever replace it? And that's where we have some fundamental choices to make. We know the internet itself is moving on, this combination of artificial intelligence, 3D imaging, virtual reality, augmented reality, and embedded technologies are going to change the whole nature of the internet and the way we interact with it. So we have a much richer conversation. We also know that the knowledge we're creating is driving a bunch of new sectors. And apologies for this, I've played with about 3 different formats for presenting this list, but across the book we identify about 30 industry sectors that we think will represent somewhere around 50% of the entire global economy over the next 10 to 20 years, in the areas of IT, in services for the citizen and the infrastructure for our homes, around the way we do production, around infrastructure for society itself, around the transformation of key industries, and around energy and the environment. We also know that there are a number of kind of interesting possibilities emerging as a result of this in terms of new business models, new business behaviours and new business strategies. I'm just going to pick on a few that really came out strongly in the book. One is this idea of the barbarians at the gate. People who are coming into a sector and really don't care about the underlying players, who are just saying, actually, in order to achieve our goals, we don't really care what collateral damage we cause. If you look at Google with their home delivery service in the US, you can now buy home electronics, food, and home repair equipment from them. You have no idea who it's coming from. Google's staff sit in Home Depot, Target, and Walmart. They buy the stuff from those stores. They get a discount because they're buying in bulk. They put it into a car. It's shipped to you. But if you have a complaint, you go back to Google. And who do my kids have more loyalty to? Google, Apple, and Facebook, or Marks and Spencer's, Tesco's, and Barclays. What they understand is that if they own the interface, they can completely savage the underlying industries. And we're going to see that happen in more and more sectors, where the players coming in who own the data and the customer relationship believe that they can completely undermine the existing players. If you look at Facebook, their whole idea about a bank is to say, actually, your assets aren't just your money. We know a lot about you because you travel. So we know you have air miles. We know about your network. We know about the things you know. All of those are tradable assets. All of those things are things that we can manage inside your bank account to generate value for you, not just your money. Barclays, HSBC, Lloyds couldn't even begin to imagine how you'd start to use that. But because Facebook is having a continuous daily conversation with you, it's in a much better position to interpret that information, use AI to start to create very powerful tools and solutions. We're also seeing people really going for speed now. This is a hotel group in China who built this 30-story hotel in 15 days. Basically, what they said is if we get a contract to put up a hotel, normally it takes 3 years. By that time, the market could have moved on and it's a waste of money. So they now prefabricate everything in the factory, and then when they get on site, they just plug it together like Lego. That's an example of what's called exponential thinking, where people are saying, not only do we have exponential growth in technology, this doubling of computer power every 18 to 24 months, but we could apply exactly the same thinking to all sorts of businesses. So if you look at Airbnb, Airbnb has 90 times more bedrooms per employee than the average hotel group. You look at the bottom of the screen, Tangerine has 7 times more customers per employee than the average bank. But the mind-blowing one is the one in the middle, Local Motors, who can come up with a new car design about 1,000 times cheaper than the typical car company, and can manufacture each car somewhere between 5 and 22 times faster. Why? Because the average Ford has about 5,000 components. The average Strati made by Local Motors is 3D printed, and therefore has about 50 components. Fundamental basis of the transformation. And if you look at sector after sector, people are now bringing these ideas to bear and saying, what if we gave ourselves permission to believe that we could do things exponentially rather than linearly? What if we allowed ourselves to explore how we might get a 10 times improvement in some aspect of our organization? And what we see is that that's having a massive impact on finances. You look at someone like Uber, their market capitalization has gone up 20 times in 3 years. And they don't have any assets. They're basically just a capacity recycler. They're taking people and cars in the economy and recycling them to become taxi services. And we're seeing that more and more, where people are saying, actually, I could use your bedroom to either house somebody in an Airbnb situation or to be a local warehousing point for Amazon to do last mile delivery. So we could see the transformation of all sorts of sectors by people reusing unused capacity in society. We're also seeing a lot of businesses now that are kind of saying, actually, this is all moving so fast that we're not going to be able to cope with this. And we're going to move to a very business-like model where we're going to strip out pretty much everything. We're going to be a small core doing strategic decision-making and financing, and everything else is going to be done for us by partners. We're seeing another group who are basically becoming adoption agencies, who are going out there and using their corporate venturing arm to go out and invest in a whole bunch of companies that they might take inside the organization to change the way they do things, or more likely that they'll invest in to say, you're our future and we want you to cannibalize our business, but we'd rather invest in it ourselves than someone else do it. And you're seeing the Trekkies, you're seeing the people who are just inspired by this idea of boldly going when no one has gone before, and taking the kind of exponential growth idea and saying, well, why can't we tackle problems of food, housing, education, healthcare? Why can't we bring that same exponential thinking to all of those areas? And whilst the existing players in the sector are saying, well, you can't do this, you don't understand, it's all very complex, then you guys are going, actually, well, we'll give it a go. And you're seeing more and more of these kind of young startups funded by all sorts of interesting people saying, why can't we take on these challenges? There's a lot of debate about whether they're just a new imperialist or whether they're genuinely socially motivated, but it's fascinating to see the kinds of challenges they're taking on. And then you're seeing the people who are just completely obsessed with automation. Many of you will be familiar with Bitcoin. The underlying technology for Bitcoin is called blockchain. Blockchain is a super secure mechanism for communicating data. But you don't have to just put financial data into a blockchain. You can put contract information, you can put healthcare information in. And what we're seeing is this idea that actually using blockchain, you can set up automated contracts that basically monitor and execute themselves. And then you could take that a stage further to create completely automated companies. Already, if you look at someone like eBay, they handle 15 million legal disputes a year in a entirely automated manner. And the idea is that we'll see the emergence of these decentralized autonomous organizations that are literally a company that exists only in software, from strategy through business rules to the processes, all completely automated. And then you might see groups of companies that are basically formed by plugging together these DAOs, which means you move to this idea of a company becoming a technology in its own right, and companies becoming platforms on which you grow other companies. All of this starts to throw up the idea that maybe in tomorrow's world we'll have a new form of enterprise where there are lots of people work with the enterprise, provide services to it, maybe partners in it, but no one owns it. That we might move to the kind of ultimate communist model as we move into the future. One of the most interesting ideas that comes out here is that as we automate, as we digitize everything, the boundaries between fantasy and reality, between virtual and real, completely disappear. And Gray Scott, one of our authors, talks about this idea of the simulated reality singularity, where literally we will exist in this parallel universe where we're never quite sure whether it's real or virtual. It won't matter to us. And there'll be some people who just happily live their life entirely in the simulated digital version of it. We also know we're moving into this world where we will have multiple actors around us, whether it's humans, enhanced humans, robots, holograms, all populating our world. Not really quite sure how we deal with that. What does that mean for the way we operate? Will that mean that we end up with intelligent assistants who are basically managing the communication with all these diverse sources of information on our behalf, and our digital twin who operates for us online, who's basically working in parallel to us, negotiating with the online world on our behalf? And there's a lot of conversation in the book about this idea of the body becoming a technology platform, that as we start to move on like this, that we will implant and augment the human body in all sorts of ways, whether it's drugs to enhance our cognition, genetic enhancements to eliminate things like rage and obesity, genetic treatments to modify our skin, physical enhancements through things like exoskeletons or electronic enhancement of the brain and body. And a number of the authors touched on this idea of this move to neurotechnologies and neurosocial networks, where the ultimate is we start to connect our brains and start to create this kind of global singularity. And the journey to that really starts with the idea of reading information from the brain and writing information to it. At the moment, there are a number of kind of quite basic techniques that aren't very sophisticated for trying to capture brainwaves. You're seeing a variety of devices out there that let you control your computer by monitoring EEGs, and a variety of other techniques being tried at the moment. But the kind of ultimate goal is to move to this thing called neural dust, which various people are working on, which is the idea of inserting this dust into the brain in one way or another, which literally attaches itself to our neurons so it can read the content of those neurons and write to them, which puts us in the situation of actually being able to upload our brain to the web. And if you look at the major players like Google and IBM, they're all working on projects with the goal of uploading the human brain to the internet and something called an exocortex, where your brain would sit online and you could upload and download information to it. The interesting question there becomes, will that be a passive or an active thing? If it's passive, it's fine. You upload it. You just hope that Google doesn't overwrite it one day because it needs the space. And you download what you need when you need to. If it's active, it means it's working on your behalf in parallel. And one of the interesting things there is, what we know is that information moves about 1 million times faster in silicon than it does in the human brain. So it could do an awful lot more processing much faster than the average human. So we could have a really interesting situation where you have an argument between your physical brain and your virtual brain, because your virtual brain is learning so much faster, and saying, well, either you listen to me or I'm off. I'm going to go work with someone else who's smarter than you. But it starts to create some really quite interesting challenges for society when we think about where this is going in the next 10 to 20 years. All of this raises the issue of, just because technology can do this, should we let it? Gert Leonard, one of our authors, really promotes this idea of a digital ethics treaty that says actually we should start to define what we want the technology to do. And just because it can, should we let it? Just because we can create artificially intelligent beings, should we? Just because we could automate every single job, should we? And whether we could actually create some sort of treaty in the same way as we have them for nuclear weapons and biological weapons, could we have exactly the same sort of thing for artificial intelligence? So my time's up, really. I think what we're seeing is a fundamental shift going on in business right now, and some big challenges that organisations have to face up with. Firstly, what are they trying to be? What is their purpose on the planet? Secondly, how do they want to behave in the marketplace? Do they want to be barbarians, or do they see themselves as having a big social role? What is their financial orientation? Are they about making money, or are they about the greater good? how are they going to work with talent in the organisation? What's the model for doing that? And then delivery. How are we going to organise ourselves to bring all that stuff to market? So I hope that makes some sense. It's a kind of fairly rapid run through 400 plus pages of 60 chapters and 62 authors. As I say, you can get a free copy of the book as a reminder. We'll put this slide up at the end. But hopefully that's made some sense. And I'm going to hand over in a second to Gus, who's then going to introduce Dean and Yates to talk about their chapters from the book.